Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to another chapter video. As you know, we've already done chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived, and now we go on to chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. If you haven't read the book or seen the movie, you might be interested in what that means. Here we go. Chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. Again, I hope you can hear the music. If not, then you're just hearing me read, instead of getting the full entertaining atmosphere for my boring reading of a book. Although this book, one of my favorites. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on their front step. But Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into the living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece had shown up there, really shown how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different colored bonnets. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photographs showed a large blonde boy riding his first bicycle on a carousel at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice that made the first noise of the day. "Get up now! Up! Get up now!" She sounds like my mother when my mother would try to wake me up. All right, that's a bit too loud, mister. That's more appropriate. Harry woke with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. "Up!" she screeched. Harry heard her walking toward the kitchen, and then the sound of the frying pan being put on the stove. He rolled onto his back and tried to remember the dream he'd been having. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorcycle in it. He had a funny feeling that he'd had the same dream before. Yes, Harry, because you were there when that happened. You were on that flying motorcycle, I might add. His aunt was back outside the door. "Are you up yet?" she demanded. "Nearly," said Harry. "Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon. And don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect for Daddy's birthday." Harry groaned. "What did you say?" His aunt snapped through the door. "Nothing, nothing." Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry got slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed. After pulling a spider off one of them, I hate when the spiders get on your socks. It's just terrible. Put them on. Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. Yes, in case no one knows, Harry slept in a closet. It's called a cupboard, I assume, over in Europe, but he slept in a closet, a small cramped closet under the staircase. That was his bedroom. He slept on a little cot in that closet. Even though there were 2 full-size bedrooms upstairs, one was Dudley's, the other was Dudley's second bedroom. What child needs a second bedroom? When he was dressed, he went down to the hall, into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden underneath all of Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had gotten the new computer he wanted. Not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted the racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise. Unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. Dudley's favorite punching bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had been something to do with living in the dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was, because all he had to wear was Dudley's old clothes. And Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. So basically, Harry was a scarecrow trying to wear a tent. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape, because all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose, the only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead that was shaped like a lightning bolt. He had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he'd gotten it. You're gonna hate this next part. You're gonna hate this little explanation that Petunia gives Harry about his scar. "In the car crash when your parents died," she had said, "and don't ask questions." Don't ask questions. That was the first rule for a quiet life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon into the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. "Comb that hair," he barked, by way of morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together. It is because Harry had very uncontrollable, out-of-kump hair. It's like you can't do anything with his hair. His hair is unmanageable. It's like my hair. But it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way all over the place. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Dudley looked a lot like Uncle. I'm reading too fast. I'm sorry. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, small watery blue eyes, and a thick blonde hair that lay smoothly on the thick fat head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. That's more like it. It's like Miss Piggy. Which doesn't say much for myself, because I'm a fat blonde person too. But you know what? I embrace it. I accept it. Harry put the plate of eggs and bacon on the table, which was difficult because there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His face fell. 36? He said, looking up at his mother and father. "That's 2 less than last year." Oh, my throat. I had to do this one without the voice because, again, my throat. "Darling, you haven't counted Auntie Marge's present. See, it's here under that big one from Mummy and Daddy." "All right, 37 then," said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry could see a huge Dudley tantrum coming on, began wolfing down his bacon as fast as possible in the case Dudley turned the table over. "You know, if I got 36 presents, I'd be grateful. I never get that many. If one year I got 38, I'd be ecstatic. If I got 36 the next year, I'd still be grateful because I never get close to 40. I wouldn't threaten to turn over the table over it. My goodness, child. It's the reason why one of the people I hate in the books and the movies is Dudley. I hate all the Dursleys, especially Aunt Marge. Aunt Petunia obviously sensed danger too, because she said quickly, "And we'll buy you another 2 presents while we're out today. How's that, Popkin?" 2 more presents. Is that all right?" Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like hard work. Finally, he said slowly, "So 39, sweetums," said Aunt Petunia. "Oh." Dudley sat down heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. All right then, Uncle Vernon chuckled. Yes, Dudley's at least Harry's age, but can't count to save his soul. Little Tyke wants his money's worth, just like his father. Attaboy, Dudley. He ruffled Dudley's hair. At that moment, the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia went to answer it, while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike, a video camera, a remote-control airplane, 16 new computer games, and a VCR. Yes, because these books were written in the 90s. Well, this book in particular came out, I believe, in 1997, 1998, one of those two. So yes, right when there was a big booming industry for VCRs. He was ripping the paper off a golden wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came back in from the telephone, looking both angry and worried. Bad news, Vernon, she said. Miss Fig's broken her leg and she can't take him. You're going to love Miss Fig later on in the series, trust me. Small spoiler, but nothing too major, I don't think. She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day, to adventure parks, hamburger restaurants, or the movies. Every year Harry was left behind with Miss Fig, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled of cabbage, and Miss Fig made him look at photographs of all the cats she'd ever owned. Now what? Said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry, as though he'd planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Miss Fig had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself that it would be a whole year before he had a look at Tibbles, Snowy, Miss Paul's, and Tufty again. Those are some odd names for cats, I will give it that. I never liked those names for cats. But again, I don't like cats. I'm a dog person myself. We could phone Marge, Uncle Vernon suggested. Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy. The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them, like a slug. What about what's her name? Your friend, Yvonne. On vacation in Majorca. I can never pronounce that word, so I always pronounce it Majorca. M-A-J-O-R-C-A. If you know what that word, how to pronounce that word, let me know. You could just leave me here, Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on television for a change, and maybe have a go on Dudley's computer. We always liked staying home alone when we were kids. Aunt Petunia looked as though she just swallowed a lemon. And come back and find the house in ruins? She snarled. I won't blow up the house, said Harry, but they weren't listening. I mean, I think I've said that same thing myself when I was a kid. I won't blow the house up, Mother. Leave me here by myself. Go talk to your boy toy again. She's gonna kill me. I suppose we could take him to the zoo, said Aunt Petunia, slowly, and leave him in the car. Oi. That car's new. She's not sitting in it alone. Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried. But he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. Tinky Daddy-Duns. Don't cry. Mummy won't let him spoil your special day, she cried, flinging her arms around him. I don't want him to come, Dudley yelled between huge pretend sobs. He always spoils everything. He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then the doorbell rang. Oh, good Lord, they're here, said Aunt Petunia frantically, and a moment later Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkus, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Piers and Dudley. On the way to the zoo, for the first time in his life, his aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him. But before they left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. "I'm warning you now. I'm warning you," he said, putting his large purple face right up close to Harry's. "I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas." Like I said, they're bigots and they're also abusive. His aunt and uncle are abusive towards him. It may not be physical, but it is obviously mental abuse. And emotional and mental abuse, I think they're both two different things, but still. "I'm not going to do anything," said Harry, "honestly," but Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was strange things often happened around Harry, and it was no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happen. Once Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber's looking as though he hadn't been there at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost bald, except for his bangs, which she left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent the sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for the baggy clothes and taped glasses. I mean, I used to tape my glasses too when I was a kid. I used to have break my glasses in half. I was a terrible child. Next morning, however, he had gotten up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting old sweater of Dudley's, brown with orange puffballs. That's just it never sounds pleasant. A brown sweater with orange puffballs. There. The harder she tried to pull over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fit as a hand puppet. But he certainly wouldn't fit. It certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. Well, I mean, that's a good possibility, since sweaters do tend to shrink, and if you put them in the wash. On the other hand, he'd gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual, when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, there he was sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from his mistress, telling them Harry had been climbing the school buildings. But all he tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was jump behind the big trash cans outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. It's an awfully strong wind, but then again, it is England, so it's pretty breezy. But today, nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Piers, to be spending all day somewhere that wasn't school, his cupboard, or Miss Fig's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things. People at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and Harry was just a few of his favorite subjects. But this morning, it was motorcycles. "Roaring along like maniacs, the young hoodlums," he said, as a motorcycle overtook them. "I had a dream about a motorcycle," said Harry, remembering suddenly. "It was flying." I always loved this part. Uncle Vernon nearly crashed into the car in front of him. He turned around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beet with a mustache. "Motorcycles don't fly!" Dudley and Pierce sniggered. And I said sniggered, with an S. Sniggered, it means laugh. God damn, it means laugh. "I know they don't," said Harry. "It was only a dream." But he wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than his asking questions, it was just talking about anything acting in a way it shouldn't, no matter if it was a dream or even a cartoon. They seemed to think that he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys bought Dudley and Pierce large chocolate ice creams at the entrance, and then, because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before they could hurry him away, they bought him a cheap lemon ice pop. Terrible! It wasn't bad either, Harry thought, looking at it as they watched the gorilla scratching its head, who looked remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. I've never seen a blonde gorilla. I'd like to. It'd be interesting. I might name it Harambe. Harry had the best morning he had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little way apart from the Dursleys so that Dudley and Piers, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime, wouldn't fall back on their favorite hobby of hitting him. They ate at the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his Knickerbocker Glory didn't have enough ice cream on top, Uncle Vernon bought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterward that he should have known it was too good to last. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. I like the reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Piers wanted to see huge, poisonous cobras and thick, man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped its body around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into a trash can. But at the moment it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. "Make it move," he whined at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't budge. "Do it again," Dudley ordered. Uncle Vernon rapped the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. "This is boring," Dudley moaned, and he shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass, trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. At least you got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on level with Harry's. It winked. Yeah, the one thing people always complain about. How can a snake wink? They don't have eyelids. Harry stared. Then he looked quickly around to see if anyone else was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and winked too. The snake jerked its head towards Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised its eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that said quite plainly, "I get this all the time." "I know," Harry murmured through the glass, though he wasn't sure the snake could hear him. "It must be really annoying." The snake nodded vigorously. "Where do you come from anyway?" Harry asked. The snake grabbed its tail, and when jabbed its tail at a little sign next to the glass, Harry peered at it. "Boa constrictor, Brazil." "Was it nice there?" The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign again, and Harry read on. "This specimen was bred in the zoo." "Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil?" As the snake shook its head, a deafening shout behind Harry made both of them jump. "Dudley, Mr. Dursley, come here! Come and look at the snake! You won't believe it! You won't believe what it's doing!" Dudley came waddling towards them as fast as he could. Out of the way, you!" he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast that no one saw how it happened. 1 second, Piers and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next they had leaped back with howls of horror. Harry sat up and gasped. The front glass of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. As the snake slid swiftly past him, Harry could have sworn a low hissing voice said, "Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. I think I'd be in shock too, but still. "But the glass," he kept saying. Where did the glass go?" The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia's strong cup of sweet tea while he apologized over and over again. Piers and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels as it passed. But by the time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how it had nearly bitten off his leg, while Piers was swearing it had tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry at least, was Piers calming down enough to say, "Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry?" Uncle Vernon waited until Piers was safely out of the house before starting on Harry. He was so angry he could hardly speak. Yeah, like me right now with my throat starting to get sore again. I forgot my drink. He managed to say, "Go! Cupboard! Stay! No meals!" Before he collapsed into a chair, and Aunt Petunia had run to get him a large brandy. Yes, because we need to give a large man who's angry a brandy. Harry lay in his dark cupboard much later, wishing he had a watch. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure that the Dursleys were asleep yet. Until they were, he couldn't risk sneaking into the kitchen for some food. He lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years. 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember, ever since he'd been a baby. And his parents had died in that car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car when his parents had died. Sometimes, when he strained his memory during long hours of his cupboard, he came with a strange vision. A blinding flash of green light and a burning pain on his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke about them, and of course he was forbidden to ask questions. There were no photographs of them in the house. When he had been younger, Harry had dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it had never happened. The Dursleys were his only family, yet sometimes he thought, or maybe hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers that they were, too. A tiny man in the violet top hat had bowed to him once while he was out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After asking Harry fiercely if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had rushed them out of the shop without buying anything. A wild-looking woman, dressed all in green, had waved merrily at him once on a bus. A bald man in a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand in the streets the other day, and then walked away without a word. The weirdest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated that odd Harry Potter in his baggy old clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang. And that concludes Chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. In the next video, we'll do Chapter 3, The Letters from No One.